Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Roland Wilson from George Mason University Korea campus. Welcome today. You're into a real treat, I think, over the next few weeks. We're going to cover what's considered a Global Unification and Bootcamp Academy. And the title of the Academy in general is Vision 2021 and Beyond, Promoting a Local to Global Understanding of the Korean Unification Process. This is your tables of content and what we're going to cover today. We have a lot to cover, and hopefully it will be exciting for you. We're going to talk about, of course, the introduction to what conflict analysis resolution is all about. We're going to talk about our program, some CAR tools or conflict analysis resolution tools. We're going to then go on to how we normally look at handling conflicts, and then how can we look at resolving these types of conflicts. So let's get started. First, whenever I give a presentation, I give a lecture anywhere, I want to say a few words of thanks. I think it's important to recognize all of you who's taken the time out of your day to come to this or to watch it online and to try to learn about peace and conflict studies and about unification processes. Of course, we also know that everybody's zoomed out. They're fatigued from all the COVID restrictions and having to watch everything online. And we certainly understand and aware of that. So a great appreciation goes to you. Also, I want to take the moment to talk about UniKorea Foundation in a few minutes because they're the great sponsors that's working with us for this project we have today. Additionally, this would not be possible without the great support from my colleagues, fellow professors, and the great young scholars and students we have in the audience that's worked on this project for a very long period of time. At the end of the day, it's all about this should be the start of what should be a long-term conversation and how to work toward peace on the Korean Peninsula and, of course, peace around the world. So let's talk about the project in general. So the project, as I just said earlier, was Global Unification Bootcamp Academy. And of course, it's being sponsored by UniKorea Foundation. It's part of what we consider a global conflict resolution series. Every year here in South Korea at Songdo campus, we try to present on the latest on what's going on around the world when it comes to conflicts. And of course, to us, being in South Korea, unification is very, very important. So the project, this project is built into 4 unique sessions. You're going to hear from some great scholars on a variety of subjects. And then we're going to have a problem-solving workshop at the end of these 4 sessions. So as you see on the screen there, we have the 4 presenters, myself today. We're going to talk about what conflict analysis resolution is. The next session, led by our great Dr. Lim from Global Affairs Program at George Mason University, Korea. We're going to talk about what do we know about North and South Korea and what do we know about unification. After that, the 3rd session is going to be held by Dr. Park, a new conflict professor here at George Mason University, Korea. And she's going to cover the regional and global political understanding and the implications of no unification versus the unification process. And then finally, I'll come back again to talk about what North and even South Korea wants in unification and how do we get there? What's the process to get from A to Z? Of course, this is going to be broken down into smaller sections too. We're pre-recording this for the audience, but when we actually conduct these sessions, we're going to have 15-minute intervals. We're going to work with groups of young scholars on a variety of subjects, and hopefully we'll be able to capture the audience in that respect. Additionally, I want everybody to know that these presentations here today and what we're going to try to attempt to accomplish in the next few weeks, over the next month or so, is meant for the younger scholars that may not have a lot of understanding on conflict analysis resolution or the unification process here in South Korea. Okay, so UniKorea. I think it's important to really emphasize the great work UniKorea or 통일나눔펀드 does. It's a great organization that was founded in 2015. It has really dedicated itself to preparing for Korean unification. So that means working toward mutual cooperation and understanding between the 2 Koreas. Additionally, they work on a variety of projects, a vast amount of projects every year. For example, promoting public awareness for the Korean unification process and helping young Korean defectors, or what I call the diaspora, that comes out of North Korea. They help build networks, as we're doing here today, and many, many other projects. And of course, the most important part is this organization transcends politics. It's nonpartisan. It tries to stay out of politics in order to be a civil movement organization that works toward unification process in general. They envision, finally, a vision of a united Korea that is competent and ready for the next generation of leaders to lead together. So the purpose of these 4 sessions and then a workshop. The overall purpose, of course, is to bring a global awareness to the complex issues surrounding Korean unification, but really any unification process anywhere in the world. It's also to help create and foster collaboration and new ideas at all levels of society, both locally here in South Korea, within the region, and of course globally itself. Finally, we wanted to help mentor the next generation of young scholars and leaders, really ready, able to take on the challenges and opportunities of unification and then within the greater region itself. So now let's talk about conflict analysis and resolution. I think it's important to get a foundation knowledge of what this is all about. We'll start by talking about our school. The Jimmy Rawson Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution used to be called the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. It's one of the oldest and largest schools in the world for peace, conflict resolution, and leadership-oriented studies. It's ranked #1 in the United States right now, quite an accomplishment. In 2017, we brought the program here to South Korea because we recognized the need to bring what we're doing around the world into the Asian context. And with over 50% of the population of the world, and certainly more than 50% of the global economy, we feel that the conflicts within Asia, especially in East Asia as well, are very important. So of course, it's the first unique program we have in Asia. Also with that, we have the Peace and Conflict Studies Center, Asia. The PACSC, as we call it, was established officially in 2019 here in South Korea at our campus. We work to bring synergy to the conflict analysis resolution program and to help promote interdisciplinary research and practice on a wide variety of conflict and peace-related issues. We act as a bridge between our research center, those within the United States at the Carter School, and those around the world that wants to do research on conflict resolution and peace within the Korean context. Additionally, we try to help students become better scholars by doing research and knowledge building through the center in order to get out in the world and actually practice what's going on and to help. So conflict analysis resolution, it's a complex field, and even the word is really unknown to many people. A lot of people in the world know about peace studies, they know about conflict, but peace and conflict resolution is a little bit different. Why is that? Our field is unique. It's a hybrid discipline that's made up and informed by a variety of other disciplines, including but not exclusion to peace studies, law, history, political science, anthropology, sociology, psychology, and many, many more. We take the best knowledge from all these different disciplines, we bring it together and bring it to a conflict resolution and resolution point of view. It's a holistic education experience that we help most students and young scholars into great practitioners for here and in the future as well. And of course, most importantly, conflict analysis resolution scholars work at all levels of society at all types of conflicts. Some work in business conflicts at major corporations, some work with departments of state and other leaders around the world, and we have diplomats as well. So certainly they're working on a variety of issues all over the world. So now let's talk about what we consider the nuts and bolts of what conflict resolution is all about. As you see on the slide, we have 6 boxes. And to me, this really gives the essence of what we can do in the conflict analysis and resolution field. As we first have to understand, conflict analysis and resolution is about the combination of great theory, additional research, and practice, meaning going out in the field and trying to understand and help resolve these difficult issues that face us all. In other words, we're trying to create the next generation of change makers, not just here in Asia, but around the world. We also recognize that all people everywhere in the world has conflicts. It's a part of human nature. It's something we have been unable to get rid of throughout the centuries, and we don't look to be able to get rid of all these conflicts in the future, but we can certainly help mitigate them and transform many of them. Additionally, we know that conflicts can be expressed in a negative way, as in violence or just disagreements, or it can be expressed in a very positive way, such as sporting events and even the Olympics, for example. We also look at conflicts from a very neutral position. If we as practitioners need to go out and look at conflicts in society and try to resolve them, whether it's at a personal level or up to the international level, we have to do so from a very neutral point of view. In other words, we can't take sides regardless of what neutral or biased feeling we may have. Additionally, we have to understand that in order to transform and peacefully resolve any conflict in the world, we have to do so at all levels of society. Conflicts are related. They're related at different levels within society itself and internationally as well. Finally, we know that we have to operate on a differing holistic view and understanding with visions to take consideration all parties and their unique human needs. Human needs is a unique term. Human needs means just that. What do we need in order not just to live, but to be happy, to expand our knowledge in life, and to have a global society that's peaceful? So we're going to take a break here in just a few minutes, but in the next session, we're going to go into conflict resolution or CAR tools that deeply go into the different parts of how we look at conflicts. Now, at the end of this presentation today, or at the end of this training series in the workshop we have, it's not going to make you experts, but hopefully it's going to give you a great understanding of what's going on. And in the future, we can continue to work together to work on a variety of conflicts and social issues around the world. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great break, and on break, for those of us that's going to be with us during the actual sessions themselves, had a chance to work on some great work together in smaller groups. By now, you're starting to maybe get a feel for what conflict resolution can do for the Korean Peninsula. In this segment, we're going to talk about conflict resolution tools in a variety of formats. So stand by and let's have some enjoyment in doing this next section. So let's first talk about how people normally deal with conflicts. Normally, as practitioners, when we look at conflicts, we deal with it based on trying to manage the conflict. What do we mean by manage? We mean by taking a conflict that is already positive or not negative and managing it, keeping the relationship positive in nature instead of it turning into something that could become very negative in nature. The next thing we can do with a conflict is trying to transform it. If a conflict is negative or becoming negative, we want to try to work on the conflict dynamics, the deep roots of the situation, and try to transform it back into something that can be positive. Then, of course, once we transform it, we may want to then manage that conflict as it's going on. Also, we use the term conflict resolution or resolving the conflict. Now, resolving the conflict is a much more difficult term and a difficult task to do. Why is that? As I said earlier in the segment, conflicts are with us always in all levels of society. It's hard to completely resolve a conflict and say it will never happen again. That's certainly our goal, though, and to do that, we need to really dig deep down into the deep nature of the conflicts and all the deep reasons that why they're having conflicts itself. We do that in order to try to obtain what's considered positive peace. Positive peace happens in society when we've taken what's happened within the conflict itself, and we've really worked for all the different levels to get the relationship back into a positive light. This is a long-term process. Resolving a conflict really is something that we can look at in a generational point of view. Finally, we have what's called settlement of conflicts. Settlement of conflicts is something that's normally used in the ADR, alternative dispute resolution term, that's used mostly by lawyers and within the court setting. Why is that? ADR normally takes the power to resolve the issues out of the hands of the parties itself and then moves in a different direction. They do so by doing such things as arbitration and court settlements, to name a few. So when we deal with conflicts as practitioners, we want to try to manage the conflict. If it's negative in nature, we may try to transform the conflict. Or again, long term, we want to resolve the conflict in order to have positive peace by all parties once again. So how else do we work on conflict? How do we get to that transforming or resolving a conflict? We do so through many different ways. First of all, we try to mediate between parties. A mediation is something that may sound strange to you, but actually everybody on earth is a mediator, whether it be mother and fathers mediating between their children, or children mediating between their mom and dads, or mediating certain social issues at school or in your professional field. We all look at trying to resolve issues between different parties. But us practitioners, when we look at mediation, we try to do so from a non-biased central position, taking into consideration both parties' needs and try to come up to some type of resolution that helps both parties sustain the relationship, either by transforming it again or managing the conflict. Also, we try to facilitate the conflicts at time. Facilitation is just that, trying to bring the parties together, trying to get the parties to come down and talk to one another in a variety of ways. So sometimes we perform the duties of both a facilitator and also a mediator within the conflict. Many of you that live in South Korea has heard the term facilitator or mediator used by President Moon. In many ways, when he's tried to facilitate the meetings between, for example, President Trump in the past and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, he's done through by trying to facilitate the means for those two leaders to meet. And then, of course, he's also tried to help mediate the conflict himself. Finally, we have what's called problem-solving workshops. Problem-solving workshops is a great tool we use throughout the conflict resolution field. And in fact, problem-solving workshops are used by diplomats and policymakers around the world as well. What is problem-solving workshop? It's getting all the different parties that are related to the party, to the conflict, both directly and indirectly together in a non-aggressive environment, normally taking them to a new environment, to really sit down and start to build on rapport and work on these deep-seated issues we may have. This is something that's not done in the afternoon or even over a weekend normally. Problem-solving workshops are done over several sessions, if not months, or sometimes even years. The end result is not the time, but the process itself. And problem-solving workshop helps bring the parties together and create that relationship. But when we're doing these problem-solving workshops, we're also doing it from, again, a very unbiased position, necessary in order to really create the environment necessary for conflict resolution to take place. Okay, so now let's talk about how all of us as individuals and as scholars may look at dealing with conflict. As you can see on the screen, there's basically 5 ways that we handle or manage conflicts at a personal level, or even at a professional level sometimes. We compete with others within the conflict itself. Sometimes we learn to collaborate with the other party during a conflict. We can compromise as well based on the situation. Then, of course, we can avoid or withdraw the conflict altogether. And then finally, we can accommodate each other in order to try to make the results of the conflict become positive in nature. So, competing styles is just that. When you compete, you're more worried about the outcome of the relationship. In other words, you want to win and you want your way, and you're not concerned about the other party in the process. We see that happen a lot around the world, even between countries in a competing process, whether it be economics or trade or whether it be about any other type of matter we may have. Next, we have collaborative style. And collaborative style just means that to collaborate over difficult issues, to try to get both sides to want to come down and put aside the negative feelings or to minimize them anyway and try to collaborate for the best long-term outcome that tries also to maintain relationships within the situation. Collaboration is not necessarily an easy step to take place. That's why mediators work hard to try to create good collaboration between the various parties. We also have avoiding. Avoiding is a very interesting thing. Avoiding style is something that's done through many parts of the world. It's just that. Sometimes if you're directly involved in the conflict, you just don't want to deal with it. You walk away from the conflict, or you just get angry and say, I'll talk about it some other time. In other words, you don't want to deal with the conflict as it may be. The problem with avoiding, though, is that you build up this aggression, this frustration and aggression that leads to worsening a relationship or the ending of that relationship, and it doesn't help build the outcome you wanted to have. So when you avoid conflicts, you're normally making the conflict worse in the long run. Ironically, avoiding style is used, if we had a toll in the audience when we have this in live, we're going to find out that many people within Asia, in fact, Asians are known to do the most about avoiding situation. That can be tied to their cultural background and how they look at life itself and the importance of trying to just get on with the conflict or get over the conflict and try to move on with their lives. So regardless though, again, avoiding may be the right thing to do right now, just to end the situation and stop it from escalating even more. But we certainly don't want to have that avoiding for a long period of time. When you avoid it for years and years and in, you have what we have today, even with North and South Korea. They've avoided coming together and trying to resolve the conflict, and therefore, both of them has built up their frustration and their aggression toward each other, and they really don't want to try now to resolve necessarily the conflict in the long term. We also have what's considered compromise. Compromising style is very important because it allows each of you to maintain your assertiveness and also have cooperation between them. Compromise is when you're not really worried about the outcome and you're not really worried about losing, but you're trying to just do your best to compromise and try to come up with the best solution you can. For example, when you want to just make a decision and move on with something, you may just decide you need to compromise in order to do so. So, sometimes when you compromise too much, you're not really satisfied. So if I compromise with you, then I may not be compromised in what I gave up in order to resolve or to end the conflict. And the other party may also not be happy with what he or she compromised or the parties compromised in order to get on with their lives, it may be. So therefore, compromising may work at times, but can also have very negative effects sometimes. So accommodation style. Accommodation style, we have a great thing there. We want to accommodate each other, but sometimes it's not necessarily good to do. Accommodation has a certain portion of a self-sacrifice, when we sacrifice some of what we wanted for some of what they wanted. So it's a little bit of give and take. While it may seem generous to do so, it also takes advantage of what may be considered weak or a weak cause of settlement. So accommodating style can work at times when you really don't care about the outcome per se, but you want to preserve or build a relationship in general. So we see in a lot of early relationships or even old friends, they end up compromising with each other to continue to have the relationship that they need to have within their lives itself. Also, sometimes compromise can be based on the position and power you may have. If you don't consider that you have a strong position or power within the relationship, or the other party that you're having the negotiation with, if it's a negotiation in general, there you may not have the ability to get what you want. So therefore, you're going to use more of accommodating style to just do that, to try to give up a little bit, but just try to maintain a little bit as well for that relationship itself. So over this portion, we talked a lot about different types of handling mechanisms for conflict. We talked about how as conflict resolution scholars really look at conflicts in general and try to either transform the conflict, to resolve the conflict, or to try to maintain the conflict or manage the conflict rather. We also looked at different mechanisms that we use, and we looked at the different ways that us individuals look at conflicts in the general perspective. During this break time coming up, you scholars that participate in our workshop and in our individual sessions are going to take a chance to work on a variety of conflict situations and find out what conflict management style do you have as an individual. You may find that your conflict management style may change based on which conflict it may be, and also may change based on where you're from, your historical background, your cultural background, and how you look at a conflict in general. So we look forward to having you in the next section as well, that we can learn about a tool, a unique tool that may help you then try to get down to the deep roots of the conflict, and then to try to transform it and move on with a successful conflict. Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome back. This is our third section of the first session in our conflict resolution series we have for you. I hope you've learned a lot over the past two sections, and now our third section we're going to talk about how do you actually work on resolving a conflict. To do so, we're going to talk about mapping. Conflict mapping or conflict mapping tools is a unique way us practitioners look at trying to understand much more about the conflict based on research and visually looking at what's going on within the conflict itself. Conflict management or conflict mapping tools are very unique. Some of them are very graphic in nature, such as drawing a tree with the roots of the conflict, the roots of the tree itself, and the limbs being the different parties within the conflict. Or they can be very complex, drawing unique maps that include different locations around the world and different parties and different levels of the conflict itself. So you have a vast variety of conflict mapping tools that are complex and detailed to very simple ones that allow you, again, to try to start to understand the conflict more and then to try to work on the conflict. Many of these conflict mapping tools also deal with acronyms to help you try to remember what's going on within the conflict itself. Now, there's not a perfect mapping tool out there. Just like theories involved in conflict resolution or any other field you may be in, it should be used in combination. Also, the conflict mapping tool that you may want to use or the tools you may want to use is based on your personal preference, and it may be based on the conflict itself. So again, there's a variety of conflict mapping tools out there, and there's a variety of ways to use them. However, I recommend whenever you look at a conflict and use conflict mapping tools, use a combination of them in general. So what I've done here in the next few slides in this section is I've created a very unique and short acronym. The acronym, I hope, will help you successfully look at and analyze a variety of conflicts. And after the end of this section, then we're going to look at how to actually deal with conflicts in working groups itself. So let's get started. So the acronym PASTENO. PASTENO is an acronym I created based on a variety of mapping tools out there that I thought would be unique for you to understand, especially when you're a young scholar starting out, or when you're just a concerned citizen who wants to try to understand how to deal with conflicts itself. And as you see on the screen, the acronym PASTENO is built on parties, the approach, the sources of a conflict, the timing of the conflict, the emotions and behavior in the conflict, the needs of the conflict, and of course, the outcome. All very important, and if you're going to try to successfully transform, manage, or resolve the conflict. Let's look at these in detail now. So parties, what do we mean by parties? Of course, we mean the parties involved directly in the conflict, whether it be two business companies fighting over copyrights, whether it be two countries have an international conflict, as we have with North and South Korea, or whether it be individual parties. We have primary parties to the conflict, but also we have secondary and third parties involved in conflict. Sometimes if you, for example, you're in school and you see two people fighting in the hallway. Now they're just not fighting normally by themselves, but you have a variety of other students and other people around them. So they are secondary parties to the conflict. They're urging on one party or another to have the conflict. Additionally, the actual conflict itself may have been created or exacerbated by other things. Third parties, maybe the two students in the hallway fighting had something happen at home. So they're in a bad mood today, or maybe they had a bad test. Maybe their teacher gave them some bad reviews. So therefore, you have a variety of parties. You have the primary parties involved in the conflict. It could be more than two, by the way, especially with international types of conflicts. Then you have secondary conflicts, secondary parties, rather, that are involved in the conflict that support, directly support, or urge on these conflicting parties, members. Then, of course, third parties as well that may be behind the scenes but are trying to either support or one party or the other that's involved in the conflict. So parties, again, is very important. Approach. As we talked about in the first section and second session, there's a variety of approaches used to try to understand and resolve the conflict. So what approach are you going to use to handle it? For example, at the basic level, you're going to call, if you're a principal or a teacher, you're going to call two students in your office and handle the conflict there. Are you going to call the parents and ask the parents to try to come in and talk about the conflict that happened between two students? Are you going to wait for the conflict to be resolved on its own, or ask somebody else to come in and try to resolve it for you? There's many, many different ways to approach the conflict, and how you approach it is very important. It's just as important how to resolve it, because if you do not approach it in the right way, then more than likely you may not be able to resolve it in the right way as well. Many times when you approach a conflict in order to try to work on it, you also want to talk about changing the scenery. If you had two students fighting in a hallway, for example, as the example I gave you before, you certainly don't want to try to handle that conflict right there in the hallway with the secondary and third parties around. Sometimes we use the word what's called changing the scenery, meaning taking the parties to a conflict to a neutral location where they can kind of relax a bit, lower their levels of frustration, and try to work on the conflict itself. Very important not to try to handle a conflict right then and there in a situation or location that may give advantage to one side or the other, or again, may not even allow the parties to talk about the conflict in general. Now we have sources of conflict. What are the sources of the conflict? There are many sources of the conflict. Not only the source may be somebody hitting one person or somebody saying something to another person, but there's other deeper sources or deeper issues for the conflict itself. What you really need to understand is that it's just like an onion. When you peel off an onion, each layer of the onion may be a little more spicy or a little bit more. The smell of it is so much stronger each layer that it begins to make you cry. Conflict layers or issues in general, you need to peel each one of those issues back and to understand the different sources and issues going on with the conflict. Not an easy task. And you always have to continue to ask, what else? What else? What else? To get down to the deep roots, the very deep roots of this conflict, or any conflict in general. Timing. Timing is an interesting word we use in the conflict field, because timing isn't that, okay, I'm going to resolve the conflict right now, but also, is the conflict ready to be resolved? Many people talk about, well, why don't you do this then or now? But it's all about whether the conflict is ready to be transformed, ready to be managed, or ready to be resolved. You normally cannot force conflict parties to try to resolve or transform the issues. It takes a little bit of patience. It also takes the right timing in order to do so. So it's just like if you give the analogy of an apple. Normally we want to pick an apple right when it's the freshest and ripest, so it has a very sweet taste to it. If we pick it too early, normally apples are what? They're sour in nature. Also, if we pick the apple too late, then maybe it's already started to rot on the tree and created bugs and worms within the apple itself, which isn't very good for the conflict, try to resolve the conflict. However, sometimes you can also make the opportunities of ripeness. What do I mean by that? If you take the same fruit analogy, you can look at a fruit nowadays. In order to make sure fruits are fresh for the market, we pick the fruits ahead of time sometimes, when they're still green, when the apples are still green, knowing that as you pick the fruit and move it to a new location, then those apples are going to be ready to eat. They're going to ripen and ready to eat. So again, ripening situations or timing of the conflict can happen naturally, or it can happen a little bit premature if it happens in the right way, to look at and try to transform the conflict dynamics itself. Next, we have emotions. Emotions and behavior is very important. We all have emotions, and when we're involved in conflict, we're certainly we're going to use those emotions to display them. If you're trying to mediate a conflict between, maybe it's a conflict between a boss and his employee, or if you're mediating a conflict between husband and wife, maybe going through divorce issues, then it's very hard to keep the emotion out of it. Even you personally, when you're involved trying to mediate or trying to do a workshop within the conflict itself, it's very difficult for you because you have your own emotions too. It's really hard to let those emotions aside or push the emotions aside, not only the emotions of the parties, but your emotions itself, to try to successfully manage or transform or resolve the conflict. But you have to try to do that. So you have to recognize the emotions itself. You also have to try to take the emotions and behavior and modify it in order to try to build up the relationship needed for success. When you're in certain situations and you deal with emotions and behavior, you also have to be understanding of the culture involved. Culture is something we don't talk about enough in the world. You know, many of the disciplines we have throughout the world are based, unfortunately, just on Western philosophies, Western paradigms. So we have to make sure that when we use a tool, such as the conflict resolution tool and a mapping tool, we apply it to the cultural specific nature of the situation. Whether you're dealing with North and South Koreans that may have similar cultures, but they're very different in how they understand those cultures, or if it's a conflict between two people from other sides of the world. The culture involved and how they may perceive the other based on his or her age, their status, and their personal or their professional power are very important to any situation. So again, emotions and behavior is important. You need to look at that in great detail to be able to understand and start to modify the conflict itself. Needs. Normally when people try to resolve a conflict, they want to look at the needs right then. But those needs that may be right in front of you may not be all the needs that are wanted by the parties themselves. Maybe what a party A and party B may want it as a need, or they thought they needed in order to be satisfied, aren't the real needs that they have. So it's important for you as a professional or as a practitioner, or even as a concerned friend, if you're going to try to help with a conflict, you have to understand what the needs are. And working on those needs takes a lot of interaction to be able to understand what's going on and to have great success. Within those needs, there's going to be also kind of a scale, left and right scale. Some of those needs can be exchanged for needs from the other party. Some of those needs may not be exchangeable, depending on who you are or the needs that it may be. And then finally, we have outcome or process. Again, we talked about, do you want to transform the conflict? Do you want to manage the conflict? Do you want to resolve it? That's part of the outcome. But also, what about the long-term relationship? The many countries and many individuals, those that deal with conflicts, sometimes we're in a hurry to resolve the conflict without thinking about the long-term success of it. In other words, we need to look at how do you not only help successfully and peacefully resolve or transform or manage the conflict, but also how do you look at that conflict over a long period of time? A lot of people, if we look at the North and South Korean example, a lot of people say, why don't we just sign a peace treaty to have peace? Well, is that really the outcome? Because if you just have a peace treaty signing and you don't look at really what happened, and you try to address those needs and the deep issues that are prevalent on both sides of the conflict, then you're never going to be able to really be successful long term. In other words, the conflict is going to reoccur again and again and again. So you want to have a great plan, and you also want at the end of that plan to set up a great monitoring and evaluation system. Whereas you monitor the conflict that you helped resolve or transform, you can also try to successfully add additional things to it or evaluate it and maybe adjust the process for a long-term stability of the situation and to try to come up with success that helps you for the rest of your time. So a lot to learn here today. A lot of you learned, I hope. The term, again, pasteno, I believe will help you become successful in trying at the basic levels to look at conflicts, whether it be conflict between your friends at school, or if you have a professional, if you're a professional at a company, or if you're at the university, or you just want to learn how to deal with conflicts, pasteno may be a great start, a great shortcut to try to help you use mapping tools and deal with different conflicts. So we talked about a lot today. And of course, after this end of this third session, those that participate in the actual sessions themselves, the students, international students, Korean students, North Korean or diaspora students that participate in these sessions and also the workshops itself are going to be able to practice these different things. We have a variety of practice-oriented group work ahead for you, and hopefully that is going to help you become much better scholars and practitioners. Remember, no matter who you are, no matter whether you're young or old, no matter from what part of the world you are from, you all have the capability to be great conflict analysis and resolution practitioners and help resolve many, many different conflicts around the world. So again, I hope you learned a little bit about George Mason University Korea, UniKorea, the great UniKorea Foundation that supports this endeavor we're doing. And also you learned a little bit more about conflict analysis resolution in general. What is it? What is CAR, as we call it for short? Also, I hope you learned that conflicts can be good or bad, positive or negative, depending on how you look at it and how you handle it. Also, you learned some ways to deal with conflicts successfully, and you learned how to then try to start to manage and then to transform the conflicts using a unique acronym called PASTENO that helps you map out, understand, and work on the conflict in general. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. And in your next session, session 2, you're going to have the great dynamic Dr. Ji Lim from our Global Affairs program at George Mason University Korea talk about, what do you think about South and North Korea in general? What do you know about these two countries? And then what do you think about unification? How can it happen? Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.